Let's go!
Welcome back to Vivid Noise, and it was inevitable. This is Mario 64. This is going to be one of those episodes where I spend most of it talking about the actual game in question and the specific things that it does that really appeal to me. Now, in this case, there's really nothing that I have to be too specific about because it's Mario 64. It's kind of the game that appeals to everyone, not just because of its legendary status, but just because it's a damn fun game. But there are some specific things I want to talk about that I haven't really heard most other people address. So the first thing I want to cover when it comes to Mario 64 is the fact that it's one of those games that I never really feel the need to complete fully. Whenever a game ends up being of that kind, the kind that I don't feel like I need to complete it fully, it's not necessarily because of some particular part of it that's very frustrating to do, or any real critical flaw that it might have. That just might be something that I feel about a certain game. Well, with Mario 64, it might just be the expansiveness of it all. Yes, Mario 64 doesn't have hundreds of levels, in fact it only has 15 main courses, but there's still a ton of stuff to do, so many stars to get, so many areas to explore, that it can be pretty overwhelming to do all of it. I've never been the kind of person to do long sessions of playing a single game. At most, I'll go back to a game for maybe an hour every couple of days, but Mario 64 is the kind of game where I get my kicks doing only a couple stars maybe once every few months. It's the kind of game where even just a little bit leaves me feeling fulfilled, I guess. It leaves me satisfied for a long time. Not to mention that despite the pretty high energy of the soundtrack, it still feels like a pretty laid-back experience, as in nothing's really pushing you forward to try and complete it, if that makes sense. The story isn't like super high stakes or anything, it's just your typical Bowser bad, so there's really nothing pushing me to try and beat the game at all. In fact, come to think of it, I've never beaten this game. I've gotten to the final floor once, and that was several years ago when I had this weird phase where it was like, I need to actually play this game because it's a legend. But then I realized, well, no, I can respect it for what it is and enjoy the parts of it I want to enjoy, but I don't have to play the whole thing. There's so many games out there, you can't really complete all of them, especially since I'm not really a YouTube reviewer, and I'd much rather focus on some more individual examples within games of things that I find interesting or really cool. And speaking of really cool, can I just say that Mario's movement in this game is insane. And I'm not just talking about its speedrun potential with all of his different moves, I just mean the way he animates. It's kind of crazy how for a first game, one of the first 3D platformers of all time, they got it so right. There are games to this day which struggle to recreate the inertia and weight that Mario's movement in this game has, and I'm specifically talking about the animation. The timing of all of his animations is just right, and the way it ties to the way he moves around the level is flawless. For as dated as this game can be in many aspects, its movement is the one thing that it does better than not just almost any other N64 game, but better than a lot of games, period. It really cannot be understated how good it feels to move Mario around. Now, I'm not saying that controlling Mario is perfect. He isn't always completely responsive, and sometimes his momentum can feel a little bit weird, but the way the animations connect to said movements, when things are going the way that they should, it's a feeling that nothing else can replicate. It's especially weird to me how Mario animates so well in this game when everything else is very stiff and obviously janky. Maybe it's because some of his movements were apparently motion captured. There were these like documented mocap tests for this game, though much like the original Tony Hawk, it's unclear how much of that actually made it into the final product. And while we're still talking about Mario's movement, the Bowser levels, man, they are spot on. Easily my favorite parts of the game when it comes to just the individual stage, or maybe more iconic parts of the game, like for example Bob-omb Battlefield because it's the first level, or Rainbow Ride, or Tick-Tock Clock because of the speed changing gimmick depending on how you enter the stage, or Wet Dry World because it's apparently cursed. But the Bowser stages are easily the most consistently enjoyable in terms of a platforming challenge. Maybe I just haven't played enough of Sunshine's bonus levels, but I still hold that Mario 64's Bowser stages are some of the best pure 3D platforming he has had, at least when it comes to the traditional form that 3D Mario takes, with his more extensive moveset compared to the classics, because you could argue that 3D Land and World do overall have the better level design. But there's just something about the flow and overall pacing and design of the Bowser stages that I want to go back to over and over again. It also helps that the camera is actually responsive in those levels compared to the rest of the game, although honestly I've never really had that much of a problem with Mario 64's camera because the automatic static camera does a good enough job, and I've never really been the kind of person to move my camera around too much in platformers, unless it's a PC exclusive platformer, obviously, where the camera is controlled by the mouse. But still, if I were to ever play through this game fully again, the Bowser stages would easily be the highlight of my experience. In fact, whenever I come back to this game, it's usually just to use a level select cheat and just play through the free Bowser levels over and over again. They're just that replayable. And that's a nice segue into Mario 64's replay value. It's no secret that this game has a pretty open structure when it comes to how you progress through it, which obviously opens up tons of different possibilities for you to replay the game. In one playthrough, you might want to be a completionist for just one particular stage before you move on, or you can just skim through everything and still get by. Admittedly, this aspect of the game is one that kind of annoys me personally. You see, I like to have my games sort of tell me what to do. I do enjoy having options, but sometimes it can be very overwhelming, and I can never really know if I'm playing the game the way it was intended to be played. That might seem like a bit of an arbitrary distinction, but it really does make a difference to me. So when I'm playing Mario 64, I find myself wondering, well, which stars should I really do? Because while the game does give you a cohesive list of stars in a specific order, it's pretty clear to me that they were never necessarily designed to be played in that order, because there are some stars that are just so much blatantly easier than others. And so these options start to create this dilemma in my head. I know it's a very OCD thing to worry about, but I won't lie when I say that it partially detracts from my ability to fully enjoy this game. I know that ultimately I should just let go of that and play whatever missions I want to and feel comfortable playing, but I can't help but feel that sometimes I'm maybe cutting the game short if I don't, or I'm cheesing things. I don't know, it's a personal thing. And although Nintendo's decision to make the game so open-ended might personally cause me some annoyance, it's also a reason why this game is just pure genius. See, Nintendo knew this was their first time making a game of this kind, the first time anyone had really made a game of this kind, and so they knew that they wouldn't get it perfectly on their first try when it came to every single mission, every single star in the game. And so what they did was they created an open-ended system where they had a ton of leeway to essentially make mistakes that wouldn't intrude on the player's overall enjoyment of the game. It's not like a lesser game where you have all of these different missions, some of which aren't very well designed, but you're still required to play them. In Mario 64, you are very open to choose whichever ones you feel are most doable. And you just know the developers had that in mind. They were aware that they weren't going to be able to make every single mission great, or even all that good to begin with, because of just how new all of this was. So by essentially giving the player a free pass from most of the missions they wouldn't want to play, they're not only adding a ton of overall replay value to the game, but they're also allowing the game to still be playable by a variety of different people and different skill levels in a variety of different time periods, be it 1996 or be it today. So many games from this time period have aged terribly, not just because they kind of look like shit or whatever, but because they have design decisions that cripple the experience as a whole, and have you doing things that don't work. In fact, things that never worked, even when they were new. People just, I guess, tolerated them a little more because they didn't know any better. The reason why most 2D games from the 5th generation have aged much better isn't just because they look nice, because 2D artwork generally ages better to begin with, but it's also because at that point in time, that style of game had pretty much been gotten down to a science, and developers were far more confident in how they could design the game and expect the player to be able to complete it through the means they are provided with without taking any shortcuts. So that's pretty much my bottom line on Mario 64. It's far from my favorite game of all time or anything, but I think it's genius, not because it's flawless. It's very flawed, but the developers allowed themselves to make those mistakes without hindering the overall experience. They weren't putting too much at stake, and they were able to contextualize it in a way that makes sense for Mario's world. It's just very smartly designed. So yeah, that's another Mario 64 video to add to the pile. I really hope you enjoyed this episode of Vivid Noise, and I'll see you guys at the next one.